That's good.
Hmm?
Let me get this bar.
How do I get this bar off? Let me, I have to stop share and then try again. How do I get this?
Maybe back out of this and then go back in. Okay, there, it's showing now. Okay, no.
What?
It was there for a second.
Hmm.
Now maybe present and then share.
Yeah, but where is my Zoom thing? Sorry, this is just not working very well. Where is the Zoom?
Okay.
But it's still here, right?
Yeah.
You don't want that,
No,
this bar.
it might go away when you present.
Share or no? Present, then
Present
share.
first and then share.
Hit present. But how do I share now? I don't see it.
Yeah.
Kevin.
Okay, try to share first. Oh.
I'm like hanging on by a thread here with all the technology. All right.
Okay. Okay.
Ah,
This works for no reason. Okay.
all right.
This is extra.
Here, you went for backward, forward, and pointing. And
Extra.
that's extra. I gave you
Yeah.
3. All right. All right.
All right. So welcome everyone to my presentation on cereal proteins. My paper is on the changes in protein structural characteristics upon the processing of gluten-free millet pasta. So a little bit of background about millet. So millet has been a staple food globally for millennia. It is currently an underutilized crop in North America and Europe for human consumption. It is used in different animal feeds for birds and things like that. But to use it for a human ingredient, first we need to identify the nutritional and functional features of millet in order to develop millet-based products. And then for the case of pasta, which is this project, there is a need to bridge the gap between the compositional and functional traits of the raw millet. And then looking at the cooking behavior to see how we can improve the quality of the pasta. So first of all, gluten-free. Why do we care about gluten-free? And a little bit of background about gluten. So gliadin and glutenin are the gluten-forming proteins. They are formed when they come together and are mixed physically. So they come in and align and create these kind of layers like you see here with disulfide bonds. So why is gluten-free relevant? Wheat is a top 9 allergen. So the gluten-forming proteins in wheat. So wheat is the kind of the main source of that. And then there's gluten sensitivity, which is kind of becoming more of a larger topic. That is a pretty broad range of things that are just fall outside of celiac disease. And then the last one is celiac disease, which we all know about. So why millet doesn't have gluten-forming proteins? It has positive agronomical benefit, and it has excellent nutrition. Taking a look at gluten-free pasta in the market, these are just 3 products that I found. One takeaway that I found that was pretty interesting is they all contain rice flour. This one here is the one that they used in this study as a commercial reference. So the only thing that's different about this sample is that it is a fresh sample where these 2 are dried, and it contains egg, which we'll talk about more later. So the objectives of this study were to first understand the effect of processing on the structural characteristic of the proteins inside of the gluten-free pasta, and then to look at the relationship between cooking behavior and then the structural organization of the proteins in the produced pasta. So looking at the materials and methods for this project, they used 4 proso millet samples. Proso is just the variety. They were grown in 2 locations in Minnesota, Lamberton and Waseca. They separated them by these 2 groups. So the ones that were rich in high molecular weight prolamins and the ones that were deficient in high molecular weight prolamins. And then they also used 2 reference samples. One was the gluten-free that I talked about before, and then another one is just a traditional wheat pasta that is also a fresh pasta, so not dried. So a little bit of background about prolamin. What are prolamins? So prolamins are a group of storage proteins in cereal grains. They're characterized by being rich in proline and glutamine, and they tend to be poorly soluble in water and soluble in alcohol solutions. These proteins are super important for anyone who eats food because they are in wheat, gliadin and glutenin, like I mentioned before. So anything that has to do with gluten is all thanks to the prolamins. So we owe a lot to these proteins. In millet, they are the high molecular weight prolamin fraction and the low molecular weight prolamin. So for the pasta sample preparation, the dry and wet ingredients were combined. They were kneaded by hand for 5 minutes, sheeted to 1 millimeter, and then cut to fettuccine and cooked in DI water. And then the ratio that they cooked them in was 1 to 20 pasta to water. And they were cooked depending on this standard method. So depending on I'm not exactly sure what the specifications were for that method, but they were cooked to a standard. And then after the pasta was produced, a portion of the fresh pasta was run on FTIR to look at secondary structure. The rest of it was freeze-dried and ground to 5 millimeters. Accessible thiols were determined using a spectrophotometric method. Solubility was conducted with 3 different solvents, a phosphate buffer with urea, and a phosphate buffer with urea and DTT. And then 2 statistical analyses were completed on all of these, as well as a couple other things that they looked at from a previous study to look at the correlation. So moving on to the results, for the solubility, it was first determined on the raw pasta dough. So they did it on the raw pasta dough, the sheeted pasta after it was shaped, and then also on the cooked sample. So this one is just on the dough, and that's why the commercial samples aren't here, because those were purchased after they already were made into pasta shapes. So looking here at the first, which is just the buffer, the solubility was relatively the same for all of the samples. For the urea, they noted that, again, there's not much difference between the urea and the buffer. This is most likely due to the fact that the samples are not primarily stabilized by hydrogen bonds or by hydrophobic bonds, which is what the urea is stabilizing or destabilizing. And then for the urea and DTT, this is breaking disulfide bonds. So most of them had been increased or more soluble in the DTT, meaning that most of these samples were primarily stabilized by disulfide linkages. If we look at EL, this one was a little bit unique because it was mostly not changed by the different solvents. And this, the authors said, was most likely due to the fact that this is one of the samples that was low in high molecular weight prolamins. These 2 samples, which are of the same variety but grown in 2 different locations, the one that was low in high molecular weight prolamins, it doesn't have a significant difference between the urea and DTT or just the urea, but the one that was high in molecular weight prolamins did have the significant difference, and same with this one. So the main takeaway here is that the samples that are high in high molecular weight prolamins are more stabilized by disulfide bonds compared to the ones that are not. Looking at the raw pasta, so this is after it was sheeted, there wasn't much significant difference between the between the DTT and just the urea. This means that the sheeting really didn't have much of an effect on this as it did in the previous one. For the gluten-free pasta, you saw the same thing, a little bit more of an increase for that one. So this means that it was a little bit more stabilized by disulfide bonds versus just hydrophobic interaction. And then for wheat pasta, the solubility was significantly lower than all of the other samples, and this increase was much higher, indicating that hydrophobic interactions as well as disulfide bonds played a crucial role in the stability of the gluten network, which we will learn from this class that we're learning today, that those two types of interactions may play a big role in the gluten network. And then for the cooked pasta, as we would expect, the solubility decreased for all of the samples due to protein aggregation and denaturation. As we know from class, proteins that are undergoing heat treatments are going to aggregate and come together and form large insoluble aggregates, which of course would show that the solubility decreases. The one notable increase was from DTT in all of the samples, showing that those disulfide linkages were stabilizing the cooked pasta the most. Moving on to accessible thiols. So thiol groups of the cysteine residues have a profound impact on the protein interaction in cereal products. Processing can induce disulfide interchange that can impact the protein network formation. So a change in accessible thiols can also indicate a change in the protein structure. So a protein that is globular or not denatured might have thiol groups that are stuck within the protein, and as it gets heated or as it's denatured, it unfolds, and those accessible thiols are now accessible. So that's what we saw here. As we cook the sample, the accessible thiols increase, showing us that as the protein unfolds, that increases. Same thing with the gluten-free pasta, and then for the wheat pasta, the accessible thiols were higher than all of the samples for the raw pasta. And then it actually decreased after cooking, showing us that the disulfide linkages were mostly formed during the dough formation, and they were not altered that much during cooking, whereas that was the opposite for the other samples. And then I also want to point out that the samples that were high in high molecular weight prolamins and low, we don't see that same difference here because this assay is looking at thiol groups, and those were already bound as disulfide linkages in the solubility that we saw before. Taking a look at the secondary structure, the millet pasta all followed this same pattern of beta sheet, random coil, alpha helix, and beta turn. And same thing for the wheat pasta. In typical wheat pasta, the authors noted that it should be beta turn that's higher than alpha helix, but back to what was in the ingredients of these pastas, which had eggs, and eggs have more alpha helix than beta turn. So that was kind of their reasoning for why the beta turn was not higher for this wheat pasta. And then looking at after it was cooked, we can see that a majority of the structures got converted over to beta sheets after being cooked. So as we know from class, again, as we heat proteins, we're lowering the amount of alpha helix and increasing the amount of beta sheets in the sample. With the millet, it was very ordered in beta sheet compared to the gluten-free and the wheat pasta, which did have an increase in beta sheet, but not as much. So this just shows that the millet samples are more ordered, and we will discuss that a little bit more in the next section. I did want to make a note that this set of data is missing because these samples, like I said before, they were purchased before they were, or as they were sheeted, and that way we wouldn't have the data for the dough. But it would have been interesting to see, especially for the wheat pasta, what the beta sheets, like how much of an increase the beta sheets there would be after forming the dough and sheeting it and layering it and things like that. Okay, moving on to the PCA analysis. So the PCA separates based on variability. It shows how different the samples are as they get separated by PC1 and PC2. So this accounted for, I think, over 86% of the variation. And this PCA analysis successfully separated the three types of samples. For this one, it shows different arrows that show different correlations depending on different attributes of the sample and how correlated they are. So it's a lot of information. The authors talked a lot about, different correlations and what they meant, but the two main takeaways for me were that random coil and alpha helix structures are positively correlated with solubility, cooking loss, and protein digestibility, where the beta sheet structures are the opposite, where they negatively correlate those attributes. Yes. So conclusions of this study: cooking induced major changes in all of the pasta types, while the sheeting process had comparatively minor effects. The millet pasta displayed key differences to the commercial gluten-free as well as the commercial wheat pasta. However, the different millet samples didn't show much variation outside of those differences that we saw with the high molecular weight prolamins and the raw pasta solubility. For the strengths and kind of weaknesses of this paper, I really liked I thought this was kind of a novel piece, like making pasta out of millet and then comparing what the protein looks like in like the secondary structure as well as some of the functionality. So I thought that was really cool. And then the second thing that I think they did really well was the PCA. They really did go into a lot of depth with the different correlations. I didn't touch too much on it, but they did a good job with that. Recommendations, as I kind of mentioned throughout the slides, I think they could have made a reference sample in-house. So like making the wheat sample and making the gluten-free sample in-house. That way we wouldn't have like those two missing data points in the secondary structure and the solubility. And then I think it would have been good if they stated the ingredients of the commercial gluten-free pasta. They only showed what the pasta was, like where they bought it. So I found this online and found that it was brown rice flour, but there was a lot of differences that they noted with the gluten-free pasta, and then they just didn't explain really much about it. They were like, okay, this is different, but I was like trying to figure out why. And it's because they use, a completely different material. And then it would have also been interesting if they tested FTIR on the flours, like before making the pasta. That way we could see kind of the difference there too. And the applicability for this study, they really showed that the millet could be a potential option for making gluten-free pasta, which was pretty interesting. But I think they need to, we need to do more research to see if we can find better formulation or better processing to better balance the functionality of the millet. And that was everything. Questions? Ichi.
Can you talk more about why you would care about solubility in like different steps of the pasta making? It's like I think like intuitively, like pasta, like I would think texture is like the most important, but like why do they measure solubility to the steps?
I think the main thing was to see kind of throughout the process, there's certain things that you can change. So if you're making a pasta, there's certain things that you have control over. And I think like the solubility and like the boiling step is something that you can't really control. So they're probably just wanted to see like comparing this one to the current samples, how does it look different compared to those samples, because this is one of the main processing steps of making pasta.
If you just measure the protein content instead of salt, like like the protein loss, like steps. I guess I'm just.
I mean, that's basically how the solubility is measured, is measuring the protein content before and after. So that's basically what they're doing, I think. But this is how we measure solubility, like.
Yeah.
So.
I think,
Oh, like that. Measure the protein in the water.
no, like that. So is solubility like a way to measure protein content of like the different nutrients? Why can't we just that one measuring protein content? I want to look at how much the protein will be stored in the system. Which measure protein.
Basically, yeah, you would measure it beforehand. That would be your initial, and then you would measure it after. And then that would be the percent solubility, I think. But this is a different solubility method than we do. This was using like BCA and different.
They, us.
Yeah.
Looking at different solubility, now I'm trying to remember why we did that, is the less soluble the protein is, the more indication of, by the way, that it's not like the bubble inside the bond that happens. Interaction via hydrogen bonding, and that's all fine. I think what we want to do is the more interaction we have, the more stable the protein is. And by doing what it is in the different buffers, we determine if we break hydrogen bonds that we already get. If we bring disulfide bonds to some of them. So we measure interaction. Yeah, so it's really trying to infer the type of interactions that are happening. It's all coming up.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're looking at the different buffers that will break specific interactions to see what those interactions are doing in different stages of the process.
Okay. I'm fine.
I think that those alpha helix structures are just less stable in heat. So they're actually aligning into beta sheet.
Based on the structure, so there's, okay, so when the protein remains, it's a lot of the alpha helix unfold. And then when the protein becomes unordered, it might fall back to sheets because the sheets are not within the same strength, like not within the same.
Intra or intramolecular.
Yeah, and then you'll see more beta.
Yeah, it's not like the alpha helix is turning into a beta sheet, but
No.
it's unfolding and then coming, like the whole protein, depending on, different areas are coming together as beta sheet.
That's when the protein has been minor
Possibly objective, but it's specifically just trying to study like the structural differences.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know why like they maybe also do like
I also was wondering that they more cared about the structure than like, yeah, I don't know why they didn't test different functionality other than solubility, but I guess that wasn't important. It wasn't as important. No.
This is the third figure of this. Go back to paper 1 and 2 actually.
Yeah. They talked a lot about like previous work that had been done on millet in particular. This is just one application. Sri.
So, I guess the conclusion was it, like if you're comparing the millet pasta to like regular grain pasta was, I guess I'm kind of confused with like the main takeaway was that the structure is similar or like.
The structure was different is the main takeaway.
Okay.
Then
So is it like a good thing or bad?
I don't know how to interpret it because like I feel like they didn't really mention if it was like a successful pasta because they were more caring about like the protein structure and like learning more about the actual proteins of the millet. I think not as much. Okay. Yeah, they didn't mention much about that. Yes.
Yeah. If not, I remember you mentioned reviews compare the results before and after meeting.
Mhm.
But
Yeah. Well, before and after kneading that we did for the millet varieties, this is before kneading and this is after kneading.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No, sheeting, so.
Sheeting, yeah.
Have
Yeah, right. Yeah, this,
like the raw process.
yeah, sheeting.
Also,
So it's like layering.
so just the layer and the cutting the.
Form the pasta.
But when you form the pasta, you layer it multiple times, so it's creating like lots of folds over each other. If we saw that with gluten, we would see probably this beta sheet increase significantly from this step.
Just doing the process of.
Mhm.
Oh,
That would be my guess, but also probably a lockout form during the kneading as well.
so the result of. Well, pasta all happen after.
Yeah.
So that's why the recommendation of doing, second inspection.
Flour, yeah. Good, Sarah.
For the solubility, I think I was checking, they said the ratio of solvent to the sample is 1 to 20. Is it like 14 or?
1 to 20 was what it was boiled in. I don't know about the solubility, what the ratio was for that.
But did they know the protein content of each sample that represents like which portion of the protein itself was?
I don't remember what the method was for the solubility. Yeah, it's definitely in there, or they definitely mentioned the method, but I just don't. Yeah. 1 in 20, I know they did for the boiling. So that's what I think you might have seen. But it could be the same, I'm not sure. I don't remember. Mhm. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, now I'm just noticing, why did they like decide to add potato such in the garden? I mean, like, I understand kind of why, but like, wouldn't that? Affected results.
Yes, definitely the rheology and those results would have affected. But I think in the introduction they mentioned about like these gluten-free pastas or things that don't have gluten, you have to add other filler like the starch or the guar gum to help bind it together. Otherwise it wouldn't work.
Thank you for having me.
Yep.
Oh, next.
All right. So today I'll be talking about oilseed protein. So how physical modification using microfluidization can affect its structure and how does it affect its functional property, but mostly it has seen only in the gelation or biological behavior. So to give you a little bit background, so the whole work is done on rapeseed protein, which is a kind of oilseed protein, but it is little different from canola seeds. Canola has very less erucic acid, less than 2%, whereas in rapeseed it is around 45% and also has high glucosinolate. Mostly they're used in the industrial purpose, not for food generally, but now they are doing a lot of breeding, which is reducing that content of erucic acid as well as high glucosinolate. So the oil meal protein that is received after extracting the oil has generally more than 20% of the protein, and it has cruciferin and nepein as the main protein fraction. Mostly they're still now used in the animal feed, but they have seen that it has all the sulfur containing amino acid, 95% of the biological availability, and also it needs some of the functional modification to use it in other food products. So to do that, there are multiple methods which are used for improving protein functionalities. So for example, physical methods, it can be heating, it can be high pressure processing, it can be ultrasound treatment, homogenization, extrusion, etc. For chemical methods, again, there is glycosylation, diamidation, succinylation, complexation with other components, conjugation. And then there is enzymatic methods, like, for example, hydrolysis or cross-linking. The one I found it very interesting that the fermentation, I really did not read much about it, that you can add the proteolytic enzyme and then separate out, and that can improve some of the functional properties as well. So here, this paper mostly talks about the microfluidization. Now, what is microfluidization? So this is a schematic diagram of a microfluidizer where there are multiple channels, very small orifice, multiple channels. When we pass the sample from here, which is having a large particles, if it comes here and then immediately it goes to very small channels, and then again we change into bigger diameter, what basically happens is, first happens the shearing action. So when this particle goes here, because the channel is very shrink, so it kind of stretches out and breaks down into smaller parts. And then there is cavitation. I have a video here. Yeah. So this is basically cavitation. What happens here when either here or here, the pressure changes. We are passing the sample in a very high pressure through a chamber, and then it goes to this channel in under very high pressure, and then it comes here when it loses the pressure, right? Because the diameter increases. And in that case, the big particles kind of burst out and then makes this kind of smaller particles. And then there is turbulence formation or eddy formation. So when this samples goes in a high velocity through these kind of small chambers, it kind of create a turbulence where the velocity of the liquid is very high. And also due to the pressure difference, this kind of small swirling formation happens, which can also impact on the sample and create smaller particles. So keeping those in mind here, what they did is this large protein from rapeseed or rapeseed meal protein, this large particles of protein they tried to reduce into the smaller particles by using a microfluidizer. The two main factors that they try to optimize is the pressure, at how much pressure the sample is going through this channel, and also how long it is going to be there. So by changing these two factors, they try to make smaller particles. So in this work, first what they did is isolated the rapeseed protein where they collected the defatted rapeseed, which was diluted in 1:10 ratios in pH 11, and then centrifuged it, collected the supernatant, and again centrifuged, adjusted the pH, and again centrifuged, and then finally washed the precipitate with using ethyl alcohol, and then finally lyophilized. For making for giving the treatment of microfluidization, what they did is, again, they solubilized that freeze-dried powder in 5.5%, again in pH 11. And then it went to the microfluidizer. As I said, they mostly concentrated on the two properties, that is pressure and time. So one sample that is controlled, which has not gone through any pressure or time. And then there is 40 megapascal, 60 and 80 megapascal of pressure, which was given for 1, 2, and 3 minutes. And then after this treatment, they did the dialysis of the samples and then finally again lyophilized. So here is another point that they missed or they did not mention is what is the pH after the treatment. If it is 11, it's very high. But in to continue, they did the analysis of the sample for particle size, surface morphology, and color, that if these treatments have changed any of these, and then checked some of the secondary structures through circular dichroism spectra and intrinsic fluorescence spectra, and they tried to see the SDS stage, and also the rheological properties for viscosity, frequency sweep, and temperature sweep. I will explain with the result. Now for particle size distribution. So first, the This one is our control sample, which has not gone through any pressure or any time, 0 megapascal and 0 time. So you can see that this has a wider particle size distribution. But as the high pressure and the time done, then the high pressure at 40 megapascal, the sample was passed through for 1 minute. This is the first one. And as the pressure increased, sorry, this is the first one. Yeah. And as the pressure increased for 2 minutes, again, this particle size distribution even became narrower. So that means the particle size reduced. But after 3 minutes, you see this pink one is the 3 minutes. The distribution again lowered down, and the size of the particle, which is between 10 to 100, came down. Why it happened is, when it first went through the 40 megapascal for 1 minute, the particle size reduced to, again, because of the longer time, again, this treatment could effectively reduce the size of the particles. But as again, for 3 minutes, what is happening, the particles are getting stabilized and they kind of coalesce together. So the particle size again increased after 3 minutes. And the same trend was seen for 60 minutes. You can see that here the distribution is even narrower than 40 megapascal. So that means that this is more efficient for reducing the particle size. And here also we see the similar trend, that this is the 1 minute and this is the 2 minutes. But in case of the 3 minute, again, the particle size kind of getting reduced. Because of the particles again comes together for longer time of treatment. And when we do the 80, when they did the 80 megapascal treatment, again, you see that this distribution becomes wider than 60 megapascal. That means even if we give a very high pressure treatment, it's not always successful. Even though the treatment is capable of creating smaller particles, but they can kind of comes together once the sample stabilizes after taking out from the microfluidizer. So again, the particle size goes up. For the same analysis of the powder, so this is the control sample. Here you can see that it's kind of a flaky structure because all these samples are lyophilized. So that's why it's kind of the flake formation happens. So we don't see much small particles here, like not small kind of aggregates here. But if you see the 40 megapascal here, you can see some of it breaks down into smaller. As we go further, the similar kind of, even in 42 or 43, we can see that there are some smaller particles. But the coalescence that I talked about in the particle size, we are not that is not very visible here because it's all dry sample. In case of same, it's not liquid. But as compared to, if you compare with the control sample, we can see that there are more broken down particles here. The more particle breakage happened here. Similar as 80 also, all the flaky structure is because of lyophilization. So you can see if you compare with the control that there are more kind of breakage here or here. But if the coalescence that we talked before, it's not very visible in the dry samples. Now comes to the fluorescence spectra. So what happened here is what they try to do is check if there are more tryptophan available in the sample. So if the particle has broken down, there might be more exposure of the hydrophobic amino acids, mostly tryptophan. So the change of intensity can tell us that whether there are more hydrophobic amino acids available after the treatment. So you see, this is the control sample, which has lower intensity. But as we increase the time and pressure, there are more hydrophobic amino acids available here. This is the 60 megapascal pressure for 2 minutes, which is we can see here, but it's not very visible that. So it means that even if the pressure and time is not really correlating, but after the microfluidization, it definitely increase. After the microfluidization, it definitely changed the way that, there are more amino acids. Tryptophan is available for checking the fluorescence intensity. So there are more intensity of the spectra. But definitely the time and the pressure combination is not really correlating, or it's not very visible here, the way that data is presented. And then they did the SDS page. Now in the SDS page, you see that there are like high protein, molecular weight protein, all are in the top, and then it's kind of smeared in the whole gel. So what they did not mention is actually that it is reducing page or non-reducing. In the method, the way it is written, probably it is non-reducing page. So that's why they did not break any interaction, right, without the reducing agent. So kind of the aggregates are in bigger size and it kind of smeared all over. They did not really see any changes after the treatment, whether the size of the aggregates changed or not. The control and the different pressure and time treatment did not give any data on that. And they also did it on 12% constant gradient gel, fixed concentration gel. But in my opinion, probably they should have done in a gradient gel with 4 to 15% or 4 to 18%. They might be seeing some of the changes in the aggregate, but if we do in a constant concentration gel, sometimes the big aggregates or different size of molecular weight aggregates are not very separable in 12% continuous ones. So there also they did not see much changes. Now, I did not mention the viscosity data because the data, the way it was presented was very confusing. But in short, the control sample had a very high viscosity as compared to the microfluidized sample. But we saw the same in the particle size as well. Larger the particle size, that might have a higher viscosity, and the smaller the particle size, it will lose that tendency. It will lose that resistance to flow. So what is this one? This is dynamic shear characteristic. It is called actually frequency sweep. So frequency, you can think of a washer dryer, cloth washer. So the way, how fast that rotor is moving, that you can think of a frequency. Now in that case, I'm putting a sample in that kind of a between two plates where it's rotating very fast, and I have a 15% solution. And in that 15% solution, you see that this is storage modulus. This talks about how elastic it is. So higher the value of storage modulus, we can say that sample has more solid-like behavior. If the sample has more loss modulus, higher loss modulus, we can say that the sample has a liquid-like behavior. Now here you see that all the control sample has a high elastic behavior. That means it behaves more like a solid when even if we increase the frequency. So that means that the sample has a stable gel. Even if we are rotating the washer dryer in very fast moving, still I can maintain the solid-like behavior. So that means this, at 15%, it can make a stable gel or stable liquid sample. Now here you see that the storage modulus is way higher than the range of the loss modulus in all the frequency level. So even if we change the frequency, increasing the frequency, it doesn't really affect much, like it only increases. And then if you see that when we treated in microfluidizer, as it lost the particle size, it became smaller and smaller. And so here also we see that there is a loss of elastic modulus. So though it is increasing, but it is at much lesser rate than this one. So that means that this, after the treatment, these samples are making very is not making as elastic gel as this one. So it has less solid-like behavior than the control sample. But if you compare this modulus and this like storage and loss, it is still has more solid-like behavior, but that extent of behaving like a solid is lesser than the control sample. So in short, I can say that these samples can make a stable gel even if we shear it very much, but it kind of makes stable gel, but the extent of the elasticity will be lesser after the treatment. And then I just chose one pressure and time combination for temperature sweep. So you can see that this is our control sample. So what happens here? We make a sample of 15% protein. Now we are heating it. We want to see at what temperature it's making gel. So the moment this storage modulus, that means the elasticity of the sample goes above 1 Pascal, we said that the sample has made gel. It's a very arbitrary method, like arbitrary number of 1 Pascal. It doesn't change much with different protein. Now you see that it goes at 1 and then it's suddenly increasing, and then this loss modulus is kind of, it is also increasing, but it is not as much as this. So this cross point happened, and here we can say that the sample has made the gel, and the gel is kind of stable gel, like the gel strength is increasing. If it broke down and it came back down, we can say that the protein has made a gel, but which is not a stable. Even if we increase much, the gel has become and the syneresis has started. Sometimes that also happens. But this says that with thermal treatment, that this protein can make a stable gel. With even we increase the temperature, it kind of goes up. And you can see this temperature where the gel formation starts is around 2 Pascal. Sorry, it is around 62 degrees Celsius. Now, if we see that here after 60 megapascal at 1 minute, the treatment, it is still same, did not change much. But as the 2 minutes, as the time of the treatment increases, this also, the gelation temperature also goes up until 69 degrees Celsius. And the similar treatment is seen in the 60 megapascal for 3 minutes treatment. So what happens is probably because the size changed and there are some changes in the secondary structure, we saw that there are more possibility of hydrophobic amino acids are also are more exposed. But though it's not really correlating, but it is saying it is telling us that even if we do the treatment and try to heat the samples, they are making weaker gel. Our gel strength is getting lower, but at the same, yeah, you can see that the gel strength is getting little lower, and also the gelation point we can delay. So that means if I have a 15% solution of this protein and we do this kind of treatment, then I can say that it is still not make gel if I heat it until 70 degrees Celsius. After that, it might start making gel. So that can tell us about if I want to make a beverage or something and how much heat treatment it can sustain. So in conclusion of this work, what they say that after doing the microfluidization, there is a change in the fluorescence intensity. That means there are more tryptophan available in the structure. And then with increasing pressure and treatment, the particle size and viscosity can be reduced, but after critical limit, it can again increase because of the coalescence of the particles. So even if we want to, it's not a linear relationship that we increase the pressure and increase the treatment time, and then the particle size will continuously reduce. That doesn't happen because they again come together. And then there are some unfolding changes happened in the secondary and tertiary structure that has resulted in the increasing gelation temperature. I did not mention the CD spectra there because they I didn't know, but Pam mentioned that they have like alpha helix more than 80% of the structure, and it did not really correlate. So I didn't show the data, but according to them, that there are some changes in the tertiary structure and secondary structure, the way the alpha helix and beta sheet and beta turn changed, but that was not really correlating in their data. So optimizing the pressure and time of the treatment, we can say that this rapeseed protein isolate can be modified to get the desired characteristics. So what kind of gelation we want, or what kind of gel strength we want at 5%, 15%, or what kind of concentration, that can be compromised by changing the pressure and time of the treatment. So in this work, they have selected the moderate treatment, 60 megapascal for 2 minutes, can be given to this rapeseed protein isolate so that they can get better characteristics rather than having again the coalescence and changing the affecting the properties. Strength of this paper is few, I think. So they studied the microfluidization as a method of physical modification of rapeseed protein isolate. And they correlated well the changes in the structure and how the functional properties, overall the functional property for rheological behavior changes. They said that this kind of treatment can reduce energy consumption. So physical modification method they have done. So I don't know why they said that it is a reduced energy treatment, because they did not do any comparison with other treatment that to get the similar kind of desired characteristics. So you can't really say that, but they have mentioned it. It is a reduced energy method. I mean, microfluidizer usually takes less energy, but that's not all. It's very costly treatment as well. It has more weakness, I think. So they did not mention the pH after the treatment. If the pH is still at 11, that's a very harsh treatment, I think. And then they washed the precipitate with ethyl alcohol and did not measure the residual alcohol content. So I don't know how the scalability of this whole method is. Surface hydrophobicity or total sulfhydryl group or free sulfhydryl group might be a better way to see that whether there are more hydrophobic amino acids are available or how the structure changed. And also they did not do any zeta potential measurement. So at different pressure and time, if the zeta potential was maintained, then that could have been a better way of explaining if the particles are coming together and coalescence are happening. And as I said, in the SDS page, they used the fixed concentration of 12%. Instead of that, they should have used 4 to 15 or 4 to 18% gradient gel. Then we might be able to see some bigger good distribution or changes in different treatments, but which it did not. And also the CD spectral analysis was not accurate. That's it.
Because of time, we didn't get it. Okay. I think I just missed something, but so when they did high pressure, they did not centrifuge on collected supernatant.
No.
But then when they did SDS page, they took the supernatant for SDS page after deleting. Why did they delete and why did they change supernatant for SDS page?
For the sample, you're telling that
So the sample was run on SDS page with the supernatant after deleting and doing the buffer thing. Why would they leave if it's not reducing? Do we need to delete if it's not? We're not using reducing agent?
no.
Why would you don't
So you
do, but I think he says you don't need to boil, you don't need to use it. Or
we do for native, we don't need to boil.
we do. We boil
We boil, we just don't boil in native gel, right?
we boil the sample when we put one, that's the interaction with the.
Yes.
With, but not on the buffers. And why supernatant was wrong on the SDS page, not the.
They probably try to see that only the soluble fraction, taking it out to check the if they can say.
Other than that. What? It's blurry.
It's bloody. All the
There's a lot of. Okay. Yeah. You know, and after I mentioned this, the control was the best, the higher plasticity, then.
yeah.
What is the benefit of that? So it shows that they could improve in the pressure and visualization hospital, decreasing their load, decreasing their activity, and we have no strong.
Yeah, so you always don't want strong gel as well, right? This is a 15% solution, right? Now, if I want a beverage at this, we don't want very strong gel either, right? So probably that's why it's, even if we are doing the treatment, it is making a gel. So control has more gel strength than the treated sample. So microfluidizer reduced the strength of the gel. Now, if it is benefiting or not, that depends on how they are applying. But if it is beverage, I don't think that we need a very thick kind of, then nobody's gonna swallow it. No, it's just characterizing if it is happens.
Especially that we don't cover as much rheology in this class, but that's helpful to learn. Thank you. Well done, and I still wonder why Susie is not registered for grade.
I wanted to graduate, but that is what happens. Okay.
All right, let's see. We were almost done with the soy legume, lecture. So we'll continue where we left off. And hopefully finish cereal proteins, not a very long lecture, cereal proteins. I was hoping to get to modification today, but I won't be able to. Okay, so what are the main classes in legumes of proteins in legumes and oilseeds. Do you remember what the classes were? What do we have? What do we have? We have, yeah, legumin, yes. So we have, is legumin a globulin or an albumin? So globulin. In globulin, we have legumin and we have viscillin. Okay, in soy specifically, legumin is known as glycinin and viscillin is known as beta-conglycinin. All right, so what are the molecular differences here? Just to, skip a little bit. So the legumin is 11S and the viscillin is 3S. So basically the legumin is the larger molecule made up of hexamers, and then the viscillin is a trimer. And then the monomer in legumin is bonded by, it has two subunits bonded by disulfide. So the acidic and the basic subunit. So it's a very complex hexamer, whereas the viscillin is made up of 3 monomers and each monomer is just one subunit. It's not made up of multiple subunits. So this is also to remind you that when we run a gel, this is really bad gel lane. It's too loaded. But anyway, we need the reducing agent and load less on the gel so that you can see the individual bands. All right, so what is the effect of pH on solubility of these proteins? So they are soluble mostly at what pH? Not the exact pH, but are they soluble mostly over pH 7? Over. So they're mostly soluble at alkaline pH. They can be soluble at very low pH, like pH 2. And they do have broad insolubility over a broad range of pH. So they are, when they're close to the isoelectric point, which is an average of 4.5, they don't carry very many charge. It has to be above 7, where they, some of the sulfide groups and also the OH groups get ionized and carry negative charge. All right, any questions so far? You're all ready for the exam? I told you, although it's a take-home exam, you really want to study, because this is due when? On Monday, right? So if I'm not here, what are you going to do? Give it to me in Portland, and if you're not going to Portland, what are you gonna do? Put it under my door on Monday? I'm gonna trust you're gonna give it to me Monday. There's no way that I can. No, but word of trust, Monday morning, right? When do you come to school? When do you come to school? Usually, what time? Huh?
Sometimes it's timing.
All right, why not? Huh? Don't you come at 12? No. I'll put a video outside of my door and time it. Actually, you can give it to Echo. Just give it to Echo by 9 a.m.
It was confusing, not mine.
No.
I like to work in the night.
I know, but usually, it should be due by midnight of Sunday, so I'm giving you extra time for Monday. So 9 a.m. to Echo should be in her office. Okay, maybe? Oh, so across from my office, there's a lady, and you'll see her name in the door, and it's Echo. So just give it to her. So I'll tell her that you will give it to her. You want to give it to me in Portland? You can. You're not. No, 9 a.m. for Echo. No, come at 8:45 and give it to Echo. No, everybody's speaking the same. That I like you, Medora, this is a different story. No, we need to, 9 a.m. would be fine. Before 9 a.m., you're welcome.
What about what time can we find you? 9 a.m.?
6 a.m. No, 7 a.m. because it's a 2-hour difference. Same time.
Oh my God!
Time difference.
Where do you travel? Before you travel.
Uh-oh.
We'll find you, whatever.
Yeah, we'll find you.
It's a risk. if
Early,
we open,
early.
so whatever we see. Well, we have data on
Oh no, I'm gonna see you at 9 a.m. We'll have to meet somewhere. Text me. You have my phone number. 9 a.m. No excuses. Oh my gosh, you guys are tough cookies. All right. So who's gonna be important? Kevin, Andressa, and Shri. Right? 9 a.m. on Monday. Huh?
It's 11 p.m. here. There's 11 a.m. here.
Time advantage.
Yeah.
There is no winning here. Are you leaving on Sunday? Well, they're gonna lose time traveling, so they gain those 2 hours. All right, wherever you are in the continent, different continent, 9 a.m. Okay, so that was tough. But I was saying, and you made me forget, is that study because the final is cumulative. If you just look at question and try to answer by looking at your note, you're not doing yourself a favor. Please study and prepare as if it is a close book exam. You'll find it much easier and much less stressful if you study. Okay. All right. I don't know why I had this here. Let me gather my thought. Why is this back? Oh, it's terrible. I don't know why, but yeah, so although that they like soy and pea are legumes, I guess now I know what I was gonna say. I was giving you examples of the DSC thermograms of the different proteins and then how they differ also on the gel. Because they have, although they're legumes, they differ genetically enough where their subunits, although they might have some homology or similarity in their amino acid, there are differences in the total cysteine, for example. The soy protein can gel better than pea protein. And also, I think I told you that there is different ratio of legumin to viscerin. So in pea, there's much less proportion of legumin to viscerin, whereas in soy, there's more legumin to viscerin. So you have legumin is the gel forming, and viscerin is more of the emulsifier. So that's why you see a difference in gel formation. You would think that, okay, I just said viscerin is more of an emulsifier and pea protein has more viscerin, but then it does not emulsify as well as soy. And this has to do with the balance of charge on the surface as much as hydrophobicity. So in proteins, it's so complex, you cannot like, you have one characteristic, it leads to a specific functionality. It's a combination of factors. So it's not just legumin to viscerin ratio, it also has to do with what else, especially in emulsification, what surface properties you have. At pH 7, what kind of charge you have, how much is the protein polymerized, how much surface hydrophobicity you have. But in general, pea protein, especially the commercial ones that you would buy commercially and use as an ingredient in food products, Usually it doesn't have good functionality compared to soy. So soy remains, no matter of the negative perception, it remains the leading plant protein in the market. So it is used in so many different products, and you'll find it mostly in the flour format, concentrate format, and isolate format. So in the flour format, defatted, so the fat is gone. You have about 50 to 55% protein, depending on the variety, and then a lot of fiber. So the carbohydrate you have here is not starch, is mostly dietary fiber. In the concentrate, you have 70 to 80% protein. And in the isolate, it's above 90%. Only soy has regulation in terms of nomenclature in the plant protein ingredients. So concentrate is 80% or less, isolate is above 90%. But pea protein, for example, there are no regulations yet. So anything above 80% is called an isolate, which is discrimination. I don't know why. Huh?
Plant protein source that has a lot of protein in the like raw format, like flour to functionality.
No, protein content is not the driving force. And so you have a lot of oil seeds like soy have high protein, but they're not as functional, like sunflower or we just heard about the canola, rapeseed, they're not as functional. No correlation with the amount of protein to the functionality. It's the type of protein. Also, concentrates in the pea world and the chickpea world, they are not even 80%, not even 70%. They're anywhere between 50 to 60% with an average of 55%. So completely different concentrations than other plant proteins. So they are used in a lot of different things. The problem with soy flour is not commonly used directly just because of the beany flavor and all of this and the indigestible carbohydrate. Unlike pulses, they don't have starch, so all of their carbohydrates are indigestible carbohydrates. Concentrates are used in meat analog production. They have less beany flavor. Mostly they are used to produce the TVP, texturized vegetable protein. And then isolates are used a lot in baked goods, in bars. The reason is they are the cleanest in flavor. And there have been decades of working with soy protein ingredients to reduce the beany flavor. A lot of products uses soybean, soy protein, all the tofu, obviously, the extruded meat alternative, cheese. So it's used in so many products. So the processing, it starts with dehulling. So of course, you clean, then you dehull. And then when you dehull, you get those, the beans, and then you crack them and you flake them so you get the flakes. Defat, mostly pressing, then hexane extraction. And then you go with defatted flakes to produce either concentrates or isolates. We talked about the two different routes of production in protein extraction lecture. So with the concentrate, you remove sugars by alcohol or acid water. You precipitate the protein and the fiber, you get a concentrate. That goes into texturization mostly and producing of texturized soy protein or texturized vegetable protein. And then the isolate goes into alkaline extraction, precipitation, cleaning, neutralization, drying, or pasteurization, drying, you get the isolate. And this you've seen in the protein extraction, so I'm not going to repeat that. So main soy products, obviously soy milk, and then tofu. So annoying. What should I do? Just escape and hit share again? Why not sharing? Not sharing. Why am I sharing? I'm sharing the wrong screen. But wait, am I sharing the wrong? I might be sharing the wrong screen here, and nobody online is telling me anything.
You're on the right.
Am I? Or screen two?
No, we go down to the PowerPoint again.
Oh, I'm
That
not
would be
sharing the
enough.
right
Oh,
PowerPoint.
thank you. Oh.
You're laughing at me. Help me out instead of laughing at me. Why?
Try to just close it and then try again, like just the presentation.
Just the
not
presentation?
share screen. Try that.
Try now?
Yeah, no.
Share, so not stop sharing and then like this is like how the selection of screens you can share. Instead of screen two,
And then there.
so the application window.
Oh, application window. Okay. Instead of laughing at me, help me. Okay. So, so the main products, soy, milk, and tofu. So soy milk is basically you get the whole soybeans, soak, ground, make that slurry. You heat. Why do we heat? Other than pasteurization, this specific temperature, 95 degrees for 3 minutes. What? No, we don't want to form a gel with soy. Milk. What? Trypsin inhibitor, right? We need to inactivate 90% of trypsin inhibitor, and that's the treatment that it inactivates trypsin inhibitor. Then we filter, the residue is usually called the okara, and then you get the soy milk. So, and then from soy milk, you can actually produce tofu. You bring it to a certain specific temperature, you add the coagulant, which has calcium. So the calcium helps formation of the, it's a divalent ion, so it helps with polymerization and formation of the tofu gel. You get cinery way out, you cool, you cut, you get the tofu. Huh? Calcium? It is, the calcium is added as a divalent ion to promote polymerization.
So you know how like there's different textures of tofu you get. So is that difference because of like protein difference, or is that because of something else?
So the tofu, sometimes you have hard tofu. So I think it's pressed longer to get more of the water out, so you harder texture. But then you have the texturized protein, which is different than tofu that goes through the factorization process.
I was just wondering from the previous slides, where the beanie flavor from, soy, what is it attached to? Is it the fat?
The beanie flavor, yeah, oxidation of the fat is mainly the big part of it. And even when they defat, there's a residual fat content of that's 1 to 2%, but it's enough to kind of promote, the lipid oxidation. But of course, there are other compounds that are endogenous to soy that have that characteristic as well. So not only the lipid oxidation, also, the heat treatment, Maillard reaction, all the amino acids that will also give you that oxidation. Yeah. Any other questions? Then texturization is also big for soy. It's one of 2 proteins that texturize really well. What's the other one? Gluten. So often in the market, you see something like simulating chicken structures, either completely soy or completely gluten, or a mixture of both soy and gluten. They texturize really well because of the high molecular weight and the presence of disulfide interchange. So they form a really nice texture. You can do low moisture extrusion with nice expansion. You can also use high moisture extrusion and you get that fibrous like structure that simulates meat. The other great thing about soy protein, it is highly digestible and also it's a complete protein. Although methionine is the limiting amino acid, it still has really high PDCAS, close to 1, but depending on the process, sometimes it lingers between 0.9 to 1 if you reduce digestibility due to processing, or if you degrade some amino acids due to processing. But in general, it really simulates eggs and casein, whey protein. So it remains the king of plant proteins, whether people like it or not. It's pretty good. And because of the benefits of soy from being high in protein and low in fat, it's good meat replacer. So a claim came out in 1999 by the FDA saying 25 grams of soy protein a day as part of diet low in saturated fat and cholesterol. So you're having less meat and more of this protein may reduce the risk of heart disease. They tried to revoke this a couple of years ago, and the industry went berserk. You can't revoke this claim. You need decades of human trials to really counter that claim. So it was not revoked. A lot of other physiological benefits have been linked to consumption of soy protein and also the presence of isoflavones. There's a lot of controversy around these phytochemicals. Some say they're good, some say they're not. There are no conclusive theories, but they are phytochemicals. They have antihypertensive activities and also antihypertensive and other biological functions. And with that note, soy protein is great. I will leave it at that. But we try to like pea protein. We are trying. Maybe beans will be better. Okay. So now I have to stop sharing and then share the other message. Looks right now. Thanks, Emily. Let's see if I can do it again. Share screen. No. Okay, got it. She's laughing at me. It's like I feel like I have 7 Noors in this. Not 7. How many are you? 8, 10. 10 Noor in the room, my daughter. That laughs at me all the time and doesn't help me. Okay. Here proteins. These are another set of magical proteins. Gluten is my first and foremost favorite protein. Why? Why? Huh? I don't care. I did my master's on it. The one that is not registered for grade knows all the answers. I'm not gonna leave you with it. I did my master's on gluten protein. Did you know? Now you know. Okay. So, is ascorbic acid a reducing agent or an oxidizing agent? College ball.
Awesome. Sorry.
50% chance. Antioxidant, so it's a reducing agent. Now put it to flour. What happens when you add ascorbic acid to flour? Huh? And so tell me, does it enhance or it doesn't? Which one is correct? B? How can B and C go together? B and C? B and C contradict each other. It cannot be. So is it B? What do you say? Help us. Yes, you might be right. C. Huh? You tell me.
No, I think if the reducing agent has to break even isocyanates, it's not to get this toxicity.
Okay, I'll tell you what the correct answer is. It's not B. It's A and C. Why? Because it reduces disulfide, interesting, and that reduces disulfide bonds and causes disulfide interesting.
Oh, you can now.
So it's funny, there's no difference, yeah.
Huh?
No, I was like, I didn't like realize these two things were different in my head at first.
Yeah, so it acts as a reducing agent. So it goes in and reduces disulfide linkages, and now you have 3 sulfide groups, and you are needing and denaturing. So you cause more disulfide interchange. So it actually acts as if it is an oxidizing agent in the dough.
And the inquiry and
Yeah.
yes.
What's that?
So the elasticity inquiry and viscosity.
Yes. Elasticity increase, viscosity decreases. So it's A and C. Not B. A and C.
So,
Yes.
ascorbic acid, act as a reducing agent and it creates the original vertical bond.
Within the molecule itself.
And then
And then when we were reading, we are unfolding, right? And then now we have more piece of fire.
because the previous vertical bond was with
That's why indirectly it acts as an oxidizing agent. Where did I lose you, Sarah? You look so. Yeah, it acts like an oxidizing. It's first reduces. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, very good. That's a good start. Glass transition. What's the definition of glass transition? I'm gonna keep you a little longer. We started 10 minutes because of all of this. Huh? What? Yes, so it goes from, yeah, crystalline to amorphous, from glassy to rubbery. So that means the same thing, crystalline to amorphous, glassy to rubbery. So with that in mind, which one is correct? Now you don't want to guess. You can guess. C. So you cannot form a dough at room temperature? B and C. You can form a dough at room temperature. How do you form the dough? How do you form it room temperature? Okay. So C, and also, if you want to reduce the amount of moisture that you add, you can also increase the temperature and you can help it jump to glass transition into an amorphous structure at higher temperature, lower moisture. So B and C. All right. This is an example of a student that got extra credit. I didn't make that. Yes, I know. I didn't make that. If you want more credit. Okay, so if you look here, we have wheat, rye, and barley belong to the same tribe. That's why wheat, rye, and barley all have gluten, for example. So they are gluten, they contain gluten-forming protein. And that's why you can't have rye or barley if you can't have gluten. Oats is a different tribe. And if it's not contaminated in the field, and if you harvest oat with no contamination of any of wheat, rye, or barley, then oat is good for if you are avoiding gluten for celiac disease or gluten allergy or sensitivity. Then we have rice. It has its own line. Then we have millet and corn. They are from the different tribe, but similar subfamily. So these are, one most common cereals. What other cereals are there? Huh? Sorghum. Sorghum. Yeah, what else? The sorghum has gluten. Oh, no. No, okay. Amaranth. What else? Any other cereal not listed here? Intermediary goods. Yeah. All right. So in terms, there's your sorghum right there. So in terms of a protein content, oats among the highest protein content, it can go up to 20% as well. And now they're breeding oat varieties up to 25% protein as well. But wheat on average has around 12%, but that depends whether it's hard wheat, very hard wheat, like durum, for example. Durum wheat has about up to 15% protein. And then soft wheat, about 9 to 10% protein. So on average, wheat has about 12% protein. So it's among those cereals with a relatively higher protein content. So in cereals, we have 4 classes of proteins based on osmotic fractionation. What are they? You don't see them all. Based on osmotic fractionation, what do albumins, globulins, thalamin, glutellins. In literature, glutellins, like glutenin, for example, sometimes is referred to as prolamine. Sometimes it's put in a glutellin category, but it is a prolamine. But because it has a little bit structural differences than gliadins and the rest of the prolamins, they are put in a glutellin category, which is a subcategory of prolamins, but mostly higher molecular weight. They are higher molecular weight prolamins. So, but they have this category called glutellin. So if we go with Osborne fractionation is going to give you 4 main fractions: albumins, globulins, prolamins, and glutellins. So if let's say rice proteins, it doesn't have high molecular weight glutellins or very, very small concentration of it. It has low molecular weight glutellins, so it comes out with the prolamine. That's why sometimes they are referred to all of them as prolamins, sometimes prolamine and glutellin. Okay? It depends on how they get extracted in the alcohol solvents. If all of them get extracted in alcohol solvent, then they are all under the prolamine. Okay, so basically the globulins, you have 7S and 11S, sometimes 12S. In oats, it's 12S, for example. And in wheat, you have very little, the fraction of globulin is not big, so you hardly hear about them. The functional proteins are your prolamins, where in wheat, you have the gliadins and glutenins. And then the main prolamine in barley is hordein, in oat is evenin, in corn is zein, so caffrin, and so on. Okay. So in wheat, the prolamine dominates, and it is categorized into prolamine gliadin and prolamine glutenin, known as glutellin, because you can't extract them all with alcohol. So the globulin is minor constituents. It has this unique viscoelastic property that no protein other than these prolamine proteins have. They are storage proteins, so they're mostly in the endosperm. And of course, we use them in many different baked products. So the different types of proteins, hard, durum, and soft, they contain different protein contents. 13 is the average for durum, but I've seen up to 15%. 11 to 13% were the hard red wheat or hard wheat in general. And then soft, where you have higher gliadin to glutenin ratio. That's why it forms viscous type of, more viscous than elastic type of dough. And it's used in cake, crackers, cookies. Also, flatbread. If you have soft wheat mixed with a little bit of hard wheat, gives you very nice pita bread. You don't want elasticity there. And there is special group of proteins. They're called pyrindolins. There is an article that I put for you for your reading. These proteins, if they are present, they are associated with the starch granule. So, but if they are present, pyrindolin A and B, you have soft wheat. If they are knocked out, they're not genetically available, then the wheat is either hard or durable. So they're kind of important because there are a lot of studies where they try to take soft wheat and they knock out the perindolin, and that variety becomes hard. So it's used a lot in breeding. And in our work, working with intermediate wheatgrass, because you have a lot of gliadin and very little of glutenins, also the breeders try to knock out the perindolins to increase the hardness of intermediate. That's going into one of his chapters. Okay. So we have proteins in all of the components of the kernel. In bran, you have protein. In the germ, obviously, you have protein. But the endosperm is where most of the protein is. And it's mostly your storage proteins, prolamins, and glutenins. So this is your Osborn fractions. Albumin is soluble in water, globulin is soluble in salt, prolamin in alcohol, glutenin, you need to add acid, and we put a reducing agent along with the alcohol to help extract or solubilize those large molecular weight insoluble proteins. So albumins and globulins are present in small concentration in wheat. They are cytoplasmic and membrane proteins, and you will find them mostly in the bran and germ. So if you crush whole wheat, then you will have a little bit higher proportion of albumin and globulin. Now, the gluten-forming proteins are gliadins and glutenin. There is no gluten in wheat. There are gluten-forming protein. Once you make the dough, you form the gluten network. So prolamin is gliadin, glutenin is glutelin, but really it's in the class of prolamin. And why are they called prolamin? Kevin, why are they called prolamin? Just
Why the gluten and then gliadin?
what prolamin? Where did that name come from?
Yeah, high in protein, high in
You just presented on that. Yes, high in protein, high in glutamine, and hence the word prolamin. So glutenin is also high in proline and high in glutamine, but it also forms disulfide linkages intermolecularly. So not just within itself, and that's why it goes into that harder to solubilize fraction, which is the glucan. So because of their structure and forming large molecular weights, they can be referred to as structural protein, although they are mostly known as storage proteins. So the way that they are different from albumin and globulins, they have high level of glutamine and high amount of proline, hence the prolamin name. They don't have a lot of charged amino acid. That's why they at pH 7, they're really not soluble. So you have to really go very high in alkalinity or very high in acidity for them to become slightly more soluble. They don't have a lot of cysteine groups, but the cysteines are positioned strategically in the extremities of the protein, like on the C terminal and the N terminal, and that's what causes more the intermolecular interaction. It facilitates the intermolecular interaction. So gluten-forming protein, they're made of gliadins, glutenins, and within the gliadins, there's the alpha, beta, gamma, and omega gliadin. Omega gliadin does not have cysteine, that's the difference. And gliadins, alpha, beta, and gamma, they form disulfide linkages within themselves, like intramolecular. So, but when you need the dough, and when you open up the structure and have free sulfide groups exposed, then gliadin can form interactions with glutenin and form that gluten network. So intra means within itself, inter means with other molecules. And usually because gliadin is not of a large molecular weight like glutenin, it's mostly contributes to viscosity and extensibility. So without gliadin, the dough is very, very elastic. With the glutenin form very strong, elastic, non-extensible dough. So the glutenin, under glutenin, there's the high molecular weight glutenin and the low molecular weight glutenins. In wheat, you have more of the high molecular weight glutenins. So the glutenin is polymeric. That means it forms disulfide interchange with other glutenin molecules. They are responsible for elasticity. They resist extensibility, so a dough is perfectly formed when you have a little bit of gliadin and a little bit of glutenin, hence the viscoelasticity. So glutenins, they have three domains. They have a repetitive central domain. So in the middle, they have a domain that repeats itself. So this is the sequence and it repeats itself. Flanked by non-repetitive, meaning you have an N-terminus and a C-terminus that are not repetitive. And that's where the cysteine residues mostly sit. And that's why they can easily form disulfide interchange. So these are when you run a gel, you have to run it under reducing conditions. Otherwise, you don't see the high molecular weight glutenin. They will just sit at the top of the gel. So because they form these large polymers. So these are your high molecular weight glutenins. This is your omega gliadin, and you have here a little bit of low molecular weight glutenins. And then that's where you have your gliadins and a little bit of low molecular weight glutenin. When you're kneading the dough, you're causing physical denaturation and unfolding, and with a little bit of ascorbic acid. You don't always have to have ascorbic acid. The fact that you're unfolding and exposing free sulfide groups, then what happens is hydrogen bonding happens first. You form beta sheets, intermolecular beta sheets. They come together, and then free sulfide groups at the extremities form disulfide linkages. And then the gliadins and glutenins interact and cross-link. So beta sheet formation is of utmost importance for the formation of gluten. So those glutamines, because all of these glutamines in the gluten proteins, they form hydrogen bond, beta sheet mostly, and allowing disulfide interchange to happen. A new theory, not theory, or discovery said, okay, so there's hydrogen bonding, there's disulfide interchange, but there's also oxidation of tyrosine and covalent linkages of tyrosine that also strengthen the gluten net. So hydrogen bonding starts, SS linkages, and also in the presence of endogenous peroxidase during the formation of the dough and also during fermentation, you get this tyrosine cross-linking, and this paper demonstrated this cross-linking by mass spectrometry. Proved that there's also tyrosine cross-linking that helps in the stabilization. So hydration, denaturation by blending, by kneading, and then the formation of the gluten network. And here's your hydrogen bonding, and then disulfide interchange, and also tyrosine cross-linking. So what's the role of the glass transition? So in order for the gluten to form, we have to exceed the glass transition. So there you need at least a 13% moisture content and room temperature. You can reduce, if you have higher water content, you can reduce the temperature of the glass transition. On the contrary, if you want to form a dough with less moisture, you have to heat up. So you really want to cross the glass transition in order to go from glassy to rubbery, or from crystalline to amorphous. So beta sheet formation is first due to regular spacing of glutamine and formation of hydrogen bonding. And then you start, if you ever make the dough, you put the water and start sticking, and what happens? You and the stickiness is gone, because now the water is contained in the gluten structure. But if you continue mixing, mix, you are breaking that structure and the water is released. Then over mixing causes stiffness. Yeah. So the dough form is extensible, it resists stretching too much. And once it's formed, it can enclose air bubbles or gas, especially during fermentation. You're fermenting the sugar, CO2 is generated, and your dough rises. So that strong gluten network allows the dough to rise and contain the air bubbles. We measure gluten characteristic. We're using different tools, rheology tools. One of them, of course, farinograph is one of them, and Kiefer rig is another. So if you have a texture analyzer and you install a Kiefer rig, you put your dough and then it pulls the dough up until the dough breaks. So it measures the resistance. And the extensibility is how long it gets. So you measure the length and then the force it took to break. So you measure the elasticity as well as the extensibility of the dough. Okay. How would reagents such as reducing agents, agents that promote disulfide linkages, and thiol blockers affect the dough structure? So if you put a reducing agent, you're reducing disulfide linkages. But concentration and type of reducing agent is important. So if you put reducing agent in a concentration that promotes breaking of disulfide and formation of disulfide interchange, that is now you're promoting oxidation and enhancing elasticity. If you block thiol groups, you are reducing elasticity. How would changes in gliadin to gluten ratio affect viscoelasticity? If you have more gliadin and less glutenin, so is it more viscous or more elastic? More viscous. So you would have a more extensible dough. So if you have more of alpha, beta, and gamma gliadins and less of the omega, you have more proteins with sulfur containing, cysteine containing. Then if you induce disulfide interchange, you enhance the elasticity. If you have more of the gamma gliadins, you enhance viscosity. And this is a study where they extracted gliadin and tried to form a dough. This is how extensible it is. It doesn't have any elasticity. when you only have glutenin, it hardly has any extensibility. That's why you need a perfect combination to get that viscoelastic properties. And that's how they studied the roles of gliadin in glutenin, and that was my master's degree. A lot of studies did that in loaf bread. So my wise advisor said, "How about you do that and study the effect on pita bread?" And I said, "Okay, we can do that." Of course, higher gliadin to glutenin ratio helped with opposite of loaf bread. Bleaching? Isn't bleaching moving in color? Yeah. Yeah, in the old flower, starts with darker and maybe white. And I don't know if that is because I made the bread and I think it has a high gluten. No, it has more oxidizing effect. Because in the bleaching, you put all of the oxidizing agent to bleach the color, to oxidize the color. But the oxidizing effect of it enhances the gluten formation and enhances the acid. Feel, I'm guessing, but if bleaching is done by an oxidizing. Okay, so typical extraction of gluten, you make the dough. Once the dough is formed and is rested, you wash the starch out and you get the gluten. I've done that. This is how I got my gluten out. So I defatted the flour, put the fat aside. I removed the gluten and got all the water that I washed with and freeze-dried it. So I have the starch, the protein, and I fractionated the protein to 9 fractions, gliadin and gluten, and reconstituted the flour with different ratios of gliadin to glutenins, and also within the gliadins, different fractions of the gliadins as well. So it was a lengthy year of reconstitution, and then baked all the bread. So this is your gluten. This is one way of getting the gluten out. But in the lab, what we do instead of doing this way, we defat the flour. We extract with salt and water. We centrifuge. Salt and water would have your albumins and globulins. Throw it away, and then you get the precipitate. You add alcohol, BME, and acetic acid. You solubilize, centrifuge, discard the pellet, and now you have your gliadins and glutenins together. Now, if you want to separate the gliadin from the glutenin, you do alcohol without BME and acetic acid, centrifuge, get the prolamins out, then take the precipitate and then put this mixture in, then you get the glutenins. And then you run, and that's your gluten that contains all of your, if you get just gluten out, then you will have everything in it. And this is the way we look at different gluten proteins from different varieties of wheat and also different species like intermediate wheatgrass. Then, oh, I know it's 5, huh? Then you bake, you look at different gliadin to glutenin ratio and the impact on loaf volume. The higher the loaf volume, the higher the glutenin. And for pita bread, the higher the gliadin ratio, the better is your pita bread. It spreads, it doesn't shrink and becomes thick. You want it to stay spread, you want it to open up, and then you want this to be thin layer. The thicker the layer, the bad is the ratio of gliadin to glutenin, because you want to spread it thin, and you don't want it to shrink back. If you spread it thin, you will have a really nice pita bread with thin layers, perfect for pocket sandwiches. I know, I'm trying, but I'm gonna have to stop. Who's presenting next time? You? Don't exceed 15. Let's make sure that your presentation doesn't exceed 15 minutes, and we'll have 5 minutes of questions, 2 questions per presenter. Is what we're gonna get, so that I can finish this and do them on the same time. And that would be Thursday, May 1st. And I sent you all this, huh? I think there is a little bit on the, on cereal, but you should be able to answer the questions. Should be fine. So I'm gonna give you the exam. I think there is, yeah. I covered everything that will be in the exam. There won't be questions from here onward. All right, so what did we say? 9 a.m. in Portland. Echo. Portland. Echo. Portland, 9 a.m. Across from my office. Echo. Her name. Yes, but I'll tell everyone for you. This is 9 a.m. That's right. Yeah, that's right. You take a lap. Or I like oh, okay. It's a it's a practice. Oh yeah, do you have your practice thing? Okay. When are we meeting for your presentation? Do I have time with you? Tomorrow we have time? Okay.
Yes,
So on Friday,
next Friday will be better for me. I'm sorry for late.
are you available between 1 and 2?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
come see me at 1, but please put it on my calendar. I blocked time to work, but that's fine. Just send me a calendar invitation for half an hour from 1 to 1:30.
Half an hour.
Half hour, we don't need one.
Half an hour from 1
to 1:30.
Oh, yes.
Okay, send me a Google.
Yes.
Otherwise I will forget.
Yeah, I'm sorry for late schedule, but
No, that's okay,
Yes.
but just try to have your slides.
yeah, yes.
Yeah, so that it will be helpful. All right, so here. Okay. Do you have? Okay, no, we have a meeting.
Oh, wait, just now?
Yeah.
Oh,
Do you
okay.
have?
No, I just curious about some real time conference before that.
Yeah, AOC, American Oil Company.
Oh, I was.
American Oil Company. Yeah.
I just
So-
curious about.
It's a good conference, they have a total division.
Yes, yes. I'm preparing the poster for the guys.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, it's 6 annual meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
If you wanted to look at your poster, that would be
oh, yeah, so I.
before you print it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Let's see, so now. Did you get one? Yeah. Yeah. you got- You got one. Can we do it in my office? I'll go see you in my office.
Okay.
Can I see you my answer for practice problem?
Yeah, when, say that again?
So the answer for practice
Yeah,
problem.
yeah. You can email me today, yeah? In the evening, it doesn't matter.